Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. We are going through Dao De Jing. And today we are up to 5. So we're going to be reading 5, 6, 7. The format is that everybody gets to read their own favorite translation. Initially, we'll just read translations. And then after that, we will discuss the poem or chapter. We'll divide it into sections and we will we'll discuss them one by one. If we finish 5, we will go to 6. If we finish 6, we'll go to 7. So far, 2 of the times we managed to do 1 each, and once we managed to do 2. So we'll find out. So it's going to be 5. Now, first, I want to request somebody who can read Mandarin to read the Mandarin version. Any volunteers? You can go ahead and just type exclamation mark. Otherwise, go ahead and type exclamation mark to read your translations. Start by saying what translation you're reading from. Kevin, go ahead. So if you could read Mandarin first and then any translation you choose.
Okay, can you hear me?
If you could speak a little bit into the mic, that would be better.
Okay.
Yes, much better.
Yeah. Chapter 5, right?
Yes.
Chinese original, it's Mandarin. Chapter 5. 天地不仁，以万物为刍狗；圣人不能以百姓为刍狗。天地之间，其托与乎？虚而不屈，动而愈出，多言数穷，不入手中。End of the text.
Thank you.
Yeah. Translation. I'm going to use. I borrowed one book from a library. It's original. I'm going to use a little bit way. Maybe you control what's way. I'm going to use change heaven and earth to sky and soil.
Sure.
Sky and soil unto human. To them, the 10,000 things are straw dogs. Wise souls unto humanity. To them, 100 families are straw dogs. Sky and soil act as bellows. Empty yet structured, it moves in exhausted giving. Yeah. By the way, the bellow, I'm going to see in one picture that is kind of, old style bellow. What's the Chinese bellow? Maybe old days, even I don't know, but like the end of my conversations here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate that. Next up is going to be Joe, James, and Judith. Joe.
So I'll be reading the Wayne Dyer version. That's the one I've been mostly focused on while reading this. 5th verse, heaven and earth are impartial. They see the 10,000 things as straw dogs. The sage is not sentimental. He treats all his people as straw dogs. The sage is like heaven and earth. To him, none are especially dear, nor is there anyone he disfavors. He gives and gives without condition, offering his treasures to everyone. Between heaven and earth is a space like a bellows, empty and inexhaustible. The more it is used, the more it produces. Hold on to the center. Man was made to sit quietly and find the truth within.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is James. James, go ahead.
I'm going to read the DC Lao translation. Okay. Heaven and earth are ruthless. I'll start again. Heaven and earth are ruthless and treat the myriad creatures as straw dogs. The sage is ruthless and treats the people as straw dogs. Is not the space between heaven and earth like a bellows? It is empty without being exhausted. The more it works, the more comes out. Much speech leads inevitably to silence. Better to hold fast to the void.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, James. Next up is going to be Judith, Dave, and Mike. Judith.
I'm reading the Stephen Mitchell translation. The Tao doesn't take sides. It gives birth to both good and evil. The Master doesn't take sides. She welcomes both saints and sinners. The Tao is like a bellows. It is empty yet infinitely capable. The more you use it, the more it produces. The more you talk of it, the less you understand. Hold on to the center.
Wonderful. I really like that translation. Thank you. Thank you, Judith. Next up is Dave.
Heaven and earth are not humane. They regard the 10,000 things as straw dogs. The sage is not humane. He regards the common people as straw dogs. The space between heaven and earth, is it not like a bellows? It is empty and yet not depleted. Move it and more always comes out. Much learning means frequent exhaustion. That's not so good as holding on to the mean.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks. Next up is Mike.
I have a Charles Muller translation. Heaven and earth are not humane and regard the people as straw dogs. The sage is not humane and regards all things as straw dogs. The space between heaven and earth is just like a bellows. Empty it, it is not exhausted. Squeeze it and more comes out. Investigating it with a lot of talk is not like holding to the center.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is Franklin.
Give me a moment. So this is by somebody named Jim Clatfelter, and it's kind of different. This emptiness is truly void and infinitely capacious. It holds whatever comes its way, eternally tenacious. Can you take whatever comes? Though judgment calls it bad and good, seeing is acceptance and nothing to be understood.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is Brian.
Okay, I've changed the book I'm using also. This is a different book. It's not purely on the Dao De Jing. It's called The Extended Perennial Way by someone called Bart Marshall, but I don't know. But anyway, in the section on Dao De Jing, he lists 15 different authors he's taken it from and compiled it into one. And I chose it because to me, it reads perfect and I really understand it. The realm of heaven and earth is indifferent to the myriad creatures. They appear as straw dogs. The sage is indifferent to the multitudes of men. They appear as straw dogs. The realm of heaven and earth is like a bellows, both empty and full. Moving it brings forth endlessly. More words, less understanding, hold fast to the core.
Wonderful. Brian, can you put the reference for this book that you're using in the chat?
Yeah, I will do.
Thank you. Next up is Madeline.
I'm using Jia Fu Feng and Jane English's translation. Heaven and earth are ruthless. They see the 10,000 things as dummies. The wise are ruthless. They see the people as dummies. The space between heaven and earth is like a bellows. The shape changes, but not the form. The more it moves, the more it yields. More words count less. Hold fast to the center.
Wonderful. Thank you, Madeline. Next up is Maritza.
So she can't, the
the ones I would have said, others have already said. So I'm going to share with you guys my humble attempts to decipher this in a way that spoke to me. Nature is unbiased. It treats all things with impartiality. The sage is unbiased. He treats people with impartiality. The universe can be likened to a bellows, seemingly empty, but never failing to produce. The more it is engaged, the more it will produce. No amount of words can fathom it. It is best to seek the center within. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Marisa.
Wonderful.
I like that. Yes, wonderful. All right, folks. So let's go ahead and talk. So I'm going to read Ursula Le Guin's translation. She calls it useful emptiness. Heaven and earth aren't humane. To them, the 10,000 things are straw dogs. Wise souls aren't humane. To them, the 100 families are straw dogs. Heaven and earth act like bellows, empty yet structured. It moves inexhaustibly giving. Does anybody else want to read? Okay. We will, Phil, go ahead.
I didn't raise my hand.
Oh, you didn't. Okay, you unmuted. So I thought that was okay. All right. So folks, let's discuss it. I'm thinking what's the best way. I mean, in some ways, so let's first, I mean, the one part is that about not human, both heaven and earth and wise souls. And then there is a second part. So how about we divide it into those two parts? So any thoughts on the first part? What is Lao Tzu saying? James.
Oh, I didn't.
Oh, okay. You unmuted. So okay, I'm going to unmute you. All right. So we'll start with Evanik. Evanik, go ahead.
Yeah. When hearing everybody's translation of this, some translations to me come off as just, it's almost cold. Like, the words that are used, like, inhumane and ruthless. And I was like, wow. So it like I could see the painting of it as impartial. But it kind of takes away the importance that we place on ourselves. We have this view of humanity and view of ourselves as so important. And like, I think what Lao is saying is that we're not that important. It's, God sees us all as equal. Nobody's better than anybody else. It's almost like we're all going to live, we're all going to die. God's like righteous and righteous. We're going to the same place eventually. So it just feels a little cold. Maybe it's just straight, but it just feels cold. That's my thought.
Thank you. Thank you, Evanik. Next up is Joe, followed by Rich. Joe.
Yeah, the translations really are, quite different. Even, reading the Ursula Le Guin, but I agree with Evanik. The idea that there's not a lot of emotion in it, but that's the important parts, because there's an element of, in my translation, of being charitable, but you have to be non-sentimental, meaning you're treating everybody the same. So there is a coldness to it, but this coldness allows you to be just. So that's something that I found to be unique. And are we just covering the first two parts?
Yeah,
of
just
this?
first two parts for now, and we'll go through it each elements as we go on.
Okay, I mean, so in the second part of mine is that the idea of giving without condition is highlighted. So the sage is like heaven and earth. To him, none are especially dear, nor is there anyone he disfavors. He gives and gives without condition, offering his treasures to everyone. So this also speaks to the importance of charity, but not being discriminative, like discriminating with your charity, so that it's, and the other part I take away from this is the idea that it's accessible to everyone. So charity isn't necessarily like a something of material gain. It could be something like treating everybody in a just way, with not necessarily making value judgments on them, or being kind and respectful to them. So there's a certain ethical component that I see it. But this is all predicated on the idea that you're treating everybody the same, no matter how you feel about them. And I think that that's why it's really important in the beginning, where it's emotionless. There's not emotions involved, because if you had emotions involved, you would be favoring one over the other. And so I think there's an element of justice that you can kind of see in there as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. Great observations. I really like the parallelism between kind of nature and the wise soul. Next up is going to be Rich, Franklin, Kevin, Madeline, Maritza, Claudio, Jean, Phil, and Dave. So Rich.
So this I see as the heart of the Taoist philosophy, and it may be uncomfortable for people, but Taoism says the universe is neutral in everything. You have supernovas which blow up and destroy, and you have stars which quietly provide sun and life. You have gentle streams which allow you to bathe in and to enjoy, and for fish to swim in. And you have tsunamis which kill hundreds of thousands of people. This is the heart of Taoism. The universe is everything. It's not benevolent. It's not kind. There's ruthless people in this world, and there's non-ruthless people in this world. And that is the way it's always going to be. We cannot hope for something that eliminates half of the universe, the black side. We need to learn, and this is what's saying, that we need to learn to accept both, and it's both exist as contrasts, because without one, you don't have the other. So he's saying the wise is not benevolent. It means don't try to do good. It doesn't mean don't do anything that you think will help. Don't try to do good. Speak from your heart, do what you can. But there's that old Taoist proverb, the farmer and the sun, in which what you do, you never know the consequences. You may try to do good, but it could turn out very bad. So don't try to be benevolent, but it doesn't say don't try to help. I mean, be yourself. And unfortunately, for some people, being yourself is going to be quite ruthless, and that's the way the universe is. So, and it says it treats men indifferently. It does. I mean, what is. It doesn't try. Unlike other spiritualities or other religions, it doesn't try to place a facade over the dark or the shadow side of the world. It just presents it as it is. And Taoists were basically people who observe and experience. They didn't try to create something as some sort of paradise. This is what it is, guys. They observe the cataclysms, and they observe the peacefulness. They see the consciousness, and hey, that's it, guys. Like it or not, that's the way the universe is.
Thank you. Kind of starting with what is, and using, instead of saying, okay, I feel this, I want this, start with what is. Fantastic. Next up is going to be Franklin, followed by Kevin. Franklin.
Joseph Campbell said that all myth takes place inside the body. And there's the image of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And when we engage in this polarity in choosing between what's right and wrong, what's good and evil, it very easily hooks us, and we are what Pema Chodron says, biting the hook and getting emotionally charged by circumstances. But this isn't the Taoist way. And so Buddha said life is suffering, and I think that's what it means here about heaven and earth are ruthless. You know, life involves suffering. Heaven and earth are ruthless. And but the Taoist, when things are going well, I'm okay. When things are not going well, I'm okay. So it's a way of being centered in the body so that circumstances are not hooking us and getting us embroiled in dramas that really don't lead to our happiness. The Taoist is just very, very much content, centered in the body. Circumstances are going on, but we're not biting the hook and getting pulled into these dramas.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Franklin. Next up is going to be Kevin, Madeline, Maritza, Claudio, Jean, Phil, Dave, Katie, and James. Kevin.
Yes, one comment earlier on from is we look for from Dao De Jing from, let's see, say we looking for happiness or good or bad. That's off the track of a Dao. From Dao is about is being and not being is balance. Let's produce each other. Chapter 2, and another chapter 3 is say not doing is the order. Because you're not doing anything, it's nothing is out of order. It's kind of balance. The next chapter themes glare. It's still kind of talk about balance. This chapter still continue. Is the title is useful emptiness. They use bellow as an example. I would consider for each breath. When we breath in, we feel our stomach, you know, areas we get kind of filled with air. Then the more we breathe in, we more breathe out. Then back to neutral. It's simple like that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Always appreciate. Next up is going to be Madeline, followed by Maritza. Madeline.
Yes, I started looking around online for exactly what a straw dog is. And apparently it was a dog made out of straw. It was used in ceremonies, then they were thrown away afterwards. So in the 11th century, Su Zhe had a commentary on it saying, "Heaven and earth are not partial. They do not kill living things out of cruelty or give them birth out of kindness. We do the same when we make straw dogs to use in sacrifices. We dress them up and put them on the altar, but not because we love them. And when the ceremony is over, we throw them into the street, but not because we hate them."
Thank you. Thank you. That was wonderful way of bringing in the context. Great. Thank you. Next up is Maritza, followed by Claudio. Maritza.
When I read so many of the versions that talked about, you know, the ruthlessness and the straw dogs, what I read there was the admonishment to us to remember that, you know, it's not, the world is not for or against you. Nature is not for or against you. I like the way, I forgot his name. Rich stated it, that, you know, what is. I really like that, because that's what I was hearing here in that first part as well, that we're just being reminded that there's just a natural flow, and it's going to flow regardless of how we feel about it, because it exists separate from how we feel about it existing.
Wonderful. So I went through all the 10 translations that are there in the link that I put in, and looked at the various ways in which that impartiality or not taking sides is defined. So that these are the various. It is impartial, does not take sides, it is without bias, it is ruthless, it is neutral, it's not humane, not kind, or inhumane. So those are the various words that are used to describe both the nature and the sage. Next up is going to be Claudio, followed by Jean. Claudio. Claudio, you need to unmute. Okay, there is some problem, so let's go to
Yes, sorry.
Yes,
Yeah.
go ahead.
I kind of lost the screen. Yeah, sorry about that. Translations seem to be very diverse. It's not. I'm gonna give it a try though. I listened to the preview, like Joseph mentioned, impartiality. That seems to be a common theme in this particular chapter. Like heaven and earth, they're treat everybody, I guess, impartially. Don't get emotionally involved in certain situations in life. I guess it's calling to be kind of like to become detached from life. That doesn't mean like complete passivity, like just without being neutral, without taking sides. Rich mentioned that it's like the universe is everything. It seems to be describing like kind of a duality between good and bad. And I guess to accept things the way they are, but treat the opposites as kind of like complementary, like yin and yang does in a way. And that's another Chinese philosophy. And Franklin mentioned like good and evil or good and bad. I guess not to get too involved in the good things in life or the bad things in life, because as Rich described, there's a duality between and good. That's the way life is. If you get too involved in something good, right just around the corner will be something bad. So you're going to experience that too. And don't get too involved in the bad things that happen in life to yourself or to society, because eventually something good will happen. That's just the way life is. It kind of balances out. So you have to display some kind of detachment towards life. Yeah, it's very complicated. That's my take on it.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Jean, followed by Phil. Jean.
Yeah, I think, yeah, my understanding is the straw dog they use as like basically show the neutral, it also shows in other chapter we're reading, like the beautiful and ugly, basically show it doesn't make any difference. They compensate each other. So I think it say exactly the same thing. It's about how good and bad, kind of evil, they're just part of the package. They kind of compensate each other. So there's not much difference between them. So that's why from heaven's point of view, they're the same. Maybe from personal view, we have this emotional judgment. But in an overall picture, you can only appreciate one thing with the other thing. You cannot appreciate just one thing.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jean. Next up is going to be Phil, followed by Dave. Phil.
It's hard to separate the first part from the second part, but I'll try.
You can go ahead and go into the second part.
No, I'll try, because the last meeting, I think it was the last meeting of the meeting with the special speaker, somebody asked what the generalization, what Lao Tzu was after. I said, well, the basic philosophy is return to nature. And I remember asking, like, which nature? I think he is setting up the distinction between two natures. There's a nature of heaven, stars, moons, that sort of thing. I would call it, beyond that, I would call it the material nature. But he's setting up the stage for a second nature, which is living nature, which is life. And The material nature is indifferent. So the sage is very knowledgeable about that kind of nature, but life creeps in from the cracks in between the physical nature to find itself a way. That's a different nature. He's setting up the neutrality of the indifferent universe, but he will show that in a sense, it is the second nature which finds the cracks in between. That is the important nature. And I think caring will come when he talks about the second nature.
Wonderfully put, Phil. I love this. It grows through the cracks of the material nature, at the boundaries there. Thank you. Next up is going to be Dave, followed by Katie. Dave.
Yes, Your Kant. This scholarly translation I have adds this note. The problem of how to read the first 4 lines is not solved in the Magmon Tui texts. One must still choose between a tough interpretation in which heaven and earth and the sage are ruthless and in regarding people and things as pawns in a game, versus the soft line where the point is that heaven and earth and the sage see each person and thing as playing a necessary role in the grand cosmic scheme. It doesn't say which is right. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. That was excellent, and bringing that in. Next up is going to be Katie, followed by James. Katie.
Yeah, I think verse 49 reminded me when I read 5. It reminded that really spells out the what you're returning with kindness, because
Katie, could you read out the verse 49 for me?
Sure, absolutely. 49. Let's see, 49. 49 is he's kind to the unkind. He's kind to the kind. He's also kind to the unkind because the nature of his being is kindness. He is faithful to the faithful, but he is also faithful to the unfaithful. The sage lives in harmony with all below heaven. He sees everything as his own self. He loves everyone as his own child.
Wonderful. Thank you, Katie. That was great, because I think the entire book is saying just one thing, and all of these are like different angles on that. So thank you for bringing in another verse, which is actually making this far more clearer. Next up is James, followed by Zach. James.
Yeah, I think one of the descriptions might be impersonal. That we're used to a personal God, that we pray to, and we get we ask for things that we need, and the personal God responds to us. But the Tao, I think, is a kind of impersonal being. That is maybe a non-being, right? It's both being and non-being, because it's an infinite being. So in a sense, that infinite being is also within us and within everything in nature. It is nature. But nature consists of, what we know in the finite world, but also includes the infinite. And that infinite is like the bellows, it never exhausts itself. And but it's impersonal. And yeah, so maybe I'll stop there.
Wonderful. I didn't mean to interrupt. I thought you were done. Do you want to say anything more? Okay. Next up is going to be Zach, followed by Franklin. Zach.
Yeah, I'm really glad you shared the different translations, because I was quite confused by mine. Mine is nature is unkind and the sage is unkind, which I guess I struggled with because kind or unkind seems to be a kind of evaluation, where a lot of these other translations use words like impartial, neutral. So that definitely resonated more with me, the kind of impartial or neutral. So I kind of gathered that it's saying, the sage is somebody who is able to see something, observe something as it is without adding their own evaluation on top of it, saying this is good, this is bad, this is kind, this is unkind. So maybe, I don't know, maybe the translation means unkind as in not kind, not unkind as in unkind, if that makes sense. So, but yeah, I at least identified more with the sense that nature, it doesn't hold any evaluation, and neither does the sage.
Yeah, I mean, I think all these translations are very different, and it's like you kind of have to work through all of them, read many of them to find some that's my approach, to find a translation that speaks to you best, because it's like, it is interpretation. These are really not translations, they are interpretations. And it is really interpretations of the Dao, of nature. So even the, Lao Tzu himself, this Dao De Jing is an interpretation of nature. So you're trying to find a guide who will help you a little better in that. So I use like a primary, for me, it's the Ursula Le Guin translation. So I use that as a spine, but I always use multiple translations whenever I'm reading any particular one. And that particular website is just fantastic. It has these 10 different translations, and you can choose 5 of them that speak best to you. And then you use it in parallel with this spine translation that is your favorite to fill out, because you can see with all the translations how much it fills out the meaning. So thank you. Next up is going to be Franklin, Kevin, Judith, and Paul. Franklin.
Thank you. One of my favorite lines in the Tao Te Ching, more words count less. And there's something in here that feels to me like martial arts, when it says, the more it moves, the more it yields. And this reminds me also of the ruthlessness of heaven and earth and the ruthlessness of the sage. Remind me of various martial art katas, like the way of the dragon, the way of the tiger, the way of various animals, which wouldn't have moral right or wrong. They would simply have very effective, very present state of awareness. And I think this is what the sage is looking for, is emptiness but alertness.
Wonderful. I like that, emptiness but alertness. You are not kind of prejudging things. You're simply saying, asking what is, and you are alert to whatever it is, regardless of how you feel. So not prejudging. But wonderful. Next up is going to be Kevin, Judith, and Paul. Kevin.
Thank you, Sanka. I want to point out here, when we do translation, you directly translate, you easily take to negative. For example, it's the first one is impartial or unkind. That's kind of, if from our human being or modern understand, it's like, that's not good. Actually, that's like we mostly people slowly get it, so stay on the neutral. And another word is straw dogs. That could be a negative meaning too, right? Dog, straw dogs. From the positive understanding. It's each individual. We from the birth to, go back to the earth, the soil, the whole life. You can doesn't matter how much you contribute. It's like a straw dog. One thing you use it, we gone. It's serve nature. We come from nature back to nature. Don't take that serious. The things, the two lines just now, Franklin actually mentioned that. I like he says better than me. The two line is like more words count less. That's so powerful, so powerful. From let's see the society or governor to the people perspective, too many rules, you're going to force people confusing. Then until you end the no more rules, the people going to more confused. If one more rules build, you're going to divide another side of people. You look, doesn't matter each rule how good you are, you cannot cover everybody. It's normally it's a group for people benefit, other people suffer. That's from the main more words come to last. The last one. That's why we need to keep. It's better to keep neutral. That's speak something like sometimes even ourselves. Let's see, we want to pursue a career, make more money. End of the day, oh, I need to have good sleep, good health. Keep it, that's internally, keep neutral, calm. And that's useful emptiness, empty our mind, then stay healthy. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. I particularly liked your point about the straw dogs, of saying that these are temporary things. They will have their day and then they will be gone. And the world is going to go on, and you're just focused on the world, and you see these as kind of transient things. Next up is Judith, Paul, and Madeline. Judith.
I just wanted to share the note that Stephen Mitchell put for this chapter, the part regarding impartiality, because I think it gives a different take from the way we've maybe been describing. So he says, the master sees all beings arising from the same source, working out their karma, usually with great suffering, and returning to the source. And since people are in constant flux, she understands that at any moment they are capable of the most astonishing spiritual transformations. Why should she pin them motionless with a judgment of good or bad? So I liked it.
No, I like this idea of reading, some of the translators have small notes along with this. So for example, Ursula Langwith has this note: the inhumanity of the wise soul doesn't mean cruelty. Cruelty is a human characteristic. Heaven and earth, that is nature and its way, are not humane because they are not human. They are not kind. They are not cruel. Those are human attributes. You can only be kind and cruel if you have and cherish a self. You can't even be indifferent if you aren't different. Altruism is the other side of egoism. Followers of the way, like the forces of nature, act selflessly. Next up is going to be Paul, followed by Madeline. Paul.
Yeah, thanks. Mostly Kevin and also what you just said, Shrikant, covers my points, but to put it slightly differently, the perspective one has of who one is will determine whether you think of this as kind or unkind in that human way, because you can't escape the fact that the use of straw dogs and the reference to it, where it's always seems to be referenced that the thing is thrown in the street after the ceremony. If you identify as the straw dog in your limited self, it's gonna feel unkind. So, I mean, so it's kind of saying, okay, I mean, there's not like we're gonna have to debate between whether this is kind or unkind text. It's like, you identify with that straw dog, you're gonna feel like it's unkind, but there's another way to identify one's larger self. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Next up, and it's wonderful kind of putting yourself in place of straw dog to look at this. Next up is going to be Madeline. Madeline.
Yes, I liked what you said, Shrikant, and also Zach's point. My translation uses the word ruthless. Heaven and earth are ruthless. And I was remembering the word Ruth. I believe it has an old root meaning mercy. So I looked it up, and it did indeed mean pity, compassion, or mercy. And I like the point that Zach made of it's the same with ruthless as with unkindness, as ruthless as being kind of deliberately going out to get someone, or being relentlessly unkind or injurious in some way. Whereas the words in Chinese may simply mean kind of neutral, without pity, compassion, or mercy, but not necessarily trying to hurt you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Madeline. Now we'll go to the second part of the chapter. Does anybody want to read just the second part? Anybody who particularly likes the translation of the second part? Just one or two people, so that it reminds everybody what it is about. Any volunteers? Judith.
Okay. The Tao is like a bellows. It is empty, yet infinitely capable. The more you use it, the more it produces. The more you talk of it, the less you understand. Hold on to the center.
Wonderful. I really like this translation, Judith. Judith, what translation is this?
Stephen Mitchell.
Stephen Mitchell. Wonderful. We'll go do two more translations, and then we will go to comments. Joe and Evanique. Joe.
Sure. Between heaven and earth is a space like a bellows, empty and inexhaustible. The more it is used, the more it produces. Hold on to the center. Man was made to sit quietly and find the truth within.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Evanique.
God is spirit, formless yet forming everything. God cannot be used up. Neither can God be described. The more you speak of God, the less you understand God. Live from this center.
Wonderful. Thank you, Evanique. Now it's time for any thoughts on all of this. So it's going to be Franklin, followed by Phil. Franklin.
Yeah, I had one more to read.
Please do.
It's that curious kind of outlier, which says, can you take whatever comes? Though judgment calls it bad and good, seeing is acceptance and nothing to be understood.
Wonderful. Thank you. So now it is Phil, followed by Dave. Phil.
Yeah, I'm glad we got to the second part. You know, like, I will admit the first part, to me, downgrades the sage. And it downgrades the sage because the difference between knowledge and wisdom. You know, in the Bible, in the Garden of Eden, there's actually two trees. The tree of knowledge, which we have all consumed very well, and the tree of life, which we seem to know very little about. And I think what's happening here is that he's talking about the second nature, as I talked about life. And I must admit, this has influenced me in terms of environmental science. That the creatures in life, through their actions, has actually a deeper wisdom than the knowledge that we possess. For instance, there's something now I just found out called the difference between laminar flow and turbulent flow. We live in a turbulent world. And like animals such as fishes, certain kind of fishes, has developed a way that they could move more efficiently because they take advantage of the eddies that's produced by turbulence to propel them forward. In fact, I saw a video where a dead fish is thrown into a stream and it's swam upstream. And also, we now know that trees actually talk to and nurture each other. We always thought it was like survival of the fittest, the big tree shades everything so the little tree can, but they in fact lend things to each other when things are running short. So this life force, in a sense, understand a kind of cooperation. And he's talking about, I think, that the empty space that they have developed is to understand the space between heaven and earth and to go through that crack and in a sense live in a sense. And that because human beings actually do have this inner life force, that's why we have to go inwards to look through the nature as a life force as well as its knowledge. And I think that's why I mean the crack in between, the space in between actually connects you to a vaster universe, because there's no longer just heaven and earth, but the space in between that must connect, which is life, connects the two. And I think that we have finally become to understand, at least through evolutionary science, that it's not about divisions, not about words, because words can only go so far. Wisdom is somehow cooperating with this emptiness that unfolds from us that is connected to the life force. And I think that's why I mean, the first part is a setup to introduce the second part. And once you understand that in terms of human response to that, you of course will understand that caring and kindness and sharing actually is part of the life force that's up above and beyond, maybe I shouldn't say above, that's beyond just merely knowledge, which is cool, uncaring, this is the way it is. And so therefore we've become beings that are not so careful about the life force, but we're more concerned with grabbing and not sharing and hoarding and all that kind of stuff. That's my thought.
Wow, Phil, that was profound. I think that was really, really good, fantastic. Because what you're saying is what really matters is life force and how it operates. And that's what the whole book is pointing us towards. Pay attention to the life force. And any words that we use, etc., are just, they're not going to get you there. They're naming something, but it's not, you have to come back relentlessly again and again to the life force, the being, what is. And that what is, the other point you're making is that what is the living thing in nature and in you. So even you, when you call yourself something, you are going away from that core. So it is kind of the return to life that surrounds you and that is within you. So beautifully put. Thank you so much. Next up is going to be Dave, followed by Maritza, Evanique, and Joe. Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Shrikant. And I have a note that's, I think we're aligned a little bit about, Phil was talking about line number 8. The Ma Wang Tui texts for line 8 have much learning, which is To Win means, where the standard text has much talk, which is To Yin. The contrast is being made, I think, between the mind full of facts and the empty space between heaven and earth, which is somehow full and inexhaustible. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dave. Next up is going to be Maritza, Evanique, and Joe. Maritza.
I feel like the second part is saying to us, once, in the first part, it's telling us, remember, what is. And then in the second part, it says, and because of this, then if you center yourself, then you can find kind of a path forward, like you can be productive, you can tap into, once you understand that nature, the Tao, the universe, as it were, that it just is, Once you understand that, you can ground yourself within yourself and then kind of tap into those things that are from without losing the sense of what's within. That's the way I see it.
Wonderful. I really like all the translations which ended up with the center, because it kind of, it just provides this place where all of that argument kind of rests. So thank you. Thanks. Next up is Evanique, Joe, and Mike. Evanique.
Yeah, reading the second part is the thing I got is that I started off with the top thought, well, the last line of living from the center. And the center is spirit. And if God is formless yet forming everything, that means he's the creator of everything. So when you go within, you're going within your spirit. And because you are a creation of the Tao or of God, when you go within, you connect with the spirit, you connect with God. But I think another thing I got is that stop trying to understand it. Just kind of be with it. Like for me, it's trying to figure it out. It's just driving me crazy. But when you just accept it, it is what it is. Like Merch said, it just is what it is. Then you can connect, and then you just try to connect more so than understanding. I think connecting is different than understanding on a spiritual level. And it's so funny because in the Bible, it says, be still and know I am God. And that's the only thing we need to know. And knowing that it's kind of like knowing that he's in control. I used to hate that phrase, God is in control. But like reading the Tao has helped me to accept that, and just accepting that he's impartial and that, it is what it is, and just trying to connect with the spirit, because that's ultimately who we are anyway, is his creation. If we're spirit, then we just should try to just connect with him. So
Wonderful. Evanique, I want to thank you, because what you're doing is that you're bringing your entire study of the Bible and Christianity into the discussion. And you're doing it amazingly well, because both in the kind of combination of the translation that you're reading and your comments, because what it is doing is that it is giving people a added reference by kind of analogy in a very different tradition, but you can see the commonalities between these two traditions. So thank you. Really appreciate that, Evanique.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm flattered.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Mike. Joe.
Yeah, I second that. What you just said about Evanique's contribution they have been excellent, and it is opening my eyes to a different perspective. Yes, for this particular one, I don't think, I'm not going to necessarily add anything to what has really been said, because it is about being centered. I do like how it ends, but man was made to sit quietly and find truth within. In other words, if we calm ourselves, that we can appreciate nature for what it is. And what nature is within, if you go to the previous line, it's empty and inexhaustible. The more it is used, the more it produces. It is constantly rejuvenating itself. It's constantly reproducing itself. It's, whether it be humans or nature itself, it's, constantly in a state of flow with one another. So if you're still, that you can begin to appreciate these things a lot more than you would be if your mind is just running.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, because when we're talking about kind of unkind, kind, all of those things are kind of human, and you are kind of caught up in this movement,
right,
of your emotion, your evaluation of the moment of whatever it is that you're seeing, and that's all you're seeing. And what you're saying is that kind of that stillness, kind of going back to the center, it is like the unmoving spot from which you're looking at the unmoving things of nature, so that you can see the movement, all movement, as just aspects, of this common nature, common way of operating, which is persistent. So it's kind of by being centered, by being still, you're connecting to that which is eternal, constant, that runs through everything. Thank you. Next up is Mike, Madeline, and Kevin. Mike.
I liked how all the translations start seemingly different than, as you said, they all ended pretty much to holding on to the center. And what I have found is that the center is almost like an alarm system for us. If you just read the Tao and study the Tao, you start hearing all of this about being centered. But also, as some presenters said tonight, it's kind of okay to go out and live your life in outlying situations sometimes, taking risks, maybe eating a second dessert, going away from moderation. And it's almost like when you get there, the Tao is almost telling you, look, I told you so. You can have the second piece of pie. You can do whatever you want in life. Pursue a relationship that you know might not be right, or a business deal, etc. But it's always nice to know that the center is there. And then it's up to you how to interpret how close you should stay. If you want to stray away from it, do it, but understand that the Tao's already told you to hold on to the center. So it's almost like proceed at your own risk.
Wonderful. Very well put. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Next up is Madeline, Kevin, and Phil. Madeline.
Yes, I wanted to talk for a moment about the image of the bellows. I think the straw dogs were probably used, everyone would have been familiar with them in their use in ceremonies. The bellows, everyone would be familiar with them because they were probably an everyday object. In other words, they were very familiar things. It would be like, as if we said something like turning a door handle, something that you do all the time. And I like the image of the bellows, the sky and the earth, because it brings the image of the Tao as a living, breathing being, comparable to something that is in people's everyday lives, and also comparable to our lungs, breathing in and out. And that we are creatures of this middle kingdom between the earth and the sky or heaven. And that we are breathing in and out just as it is breathing in and out.
Wonderful. I like that. Parallelism. I mean, I've like many traditions use the breathing in and breathing out that you do as a way of connecting to kind of natural rhythms of life. So it's a very powerful point. Thank you. Next up is going to be Kevin, Phil, and Zach. Kevin.
Yeah, yes, thank you. You embrace our unique, yes, got a unique perspective, very beautiful translation, common. And I'm going to follow Madeline about bellows. I seen the previous picture. That's when I was child, our family and neighbors, they use that too. Currently, like going to far village, they still use that bellow. That's, you see the handle in the middle. That's you. If you see, you are.
I was trying to share the bellows, but didn't come up. Okay, I'm going to still try. Continue, please.
Yeah, it's a beautiful theme. So that's one to emphasize how metaphor in old days they use this. Let's see, cooking a meal, but let's see, pull out the bell. Okay, pull out. Now it's this is air in. This is the breath, like we breathe in the air. Then you put it there, air come out. You see the right on the bottom, the middle. That's air going to your. For example, you have a firework over there. They're going to cook, cook something. They're going to this kind of metaphor. This in this chapter, these two metaphor. One is straw dogs. Let's say those days don't consider straw dog. It's bad. Like we consider you are a dog or something that kind. It's we are all beings. So the easily can metaphor get a kind of feeling, the dog feeling, I kind of feeling the straw dogs. I'm a straw dogs kind of feeling. So how beautiful that kind of so I'm going to conclude my here. This is straw dog is like the air of bellows, come and go. So for ourselves, let it go. Nature is about neutral, center, middle, empty, or contract with yourself. Thank you.
Wonderful, Kevin. That was excellent. Thank you so much. I particularly like the image of the bellow, and you can actually visualize that's beautiful. Next up is going to be Phil, followed by Zach. Phil.
Yeah, I wanted to connect the 2 points, the center and the bellows, but I'm going to connect the bellows in a different way, because he's talking about dynamism as well as the resting point. You know, I often think about a spiral. You must activate the spiral as well, because otherwise it's a standstill. So the action was important. You could either spin it one way and the spiral will actually either spin outwards into the world. You spin it the other way, it will spin back to the center. And I think that sort of repetition gives us an understanding of how like the movement of opposites work, because as you go outwards, you are receiving the world. You come inwards, you're receiving the world. I mean, it's like you have to do both actions, because I think if you just merely sit still and you take that metaphor too seriously, then it lacks this dynamism, because as the bellow just rests there and nothing happens, it seems hollow and empty. But when you move it, but I guess he's also saying that you can't move it too fast, because it's like beyond your comprehension. So you move it in this sort of almost like a Tai Chi way, soft and gentle, so that it fits the rhythm of living. So I kind of think, I often think, you know, because the spiral, when you spin it one way, spin it outward, it seems like a kind of romanticism. You're reaching out to the universe. When you spin it inwards, it almost seems like a classicism of meditation and coming in. So I kind of think that metaphor of the dynamism of the spinning spiral is kind of interesting. The galaxy is a spiral. So I kind of think that, I think you might want to think about that metaphor, because once I asked somebody who, you know, had a kind of spiral, I said, which way is it spinning? And she couldn't answer it. I said, well, you have to think about it.
Wonderful, thank you. I mean, spiral, I mean, I've looked at kind of spirals in life, living things, and it's quite amazing when you look at spirals, whether it is in cells, you know, cell growth, or in terms of how little buds kind of uncoil, how different ferns unfurl. So there is something, I mean, that movement, that pattern actually captures the pattern of life really well. So thank you, appreciate that. Next up is Zach, followed by Franklin. Zach.
Yeah, I guess this is more of a question than anything. I've been looking at these translations, and there's a very like interesting relationship happening where this second translation talking about the Tao, it says, the more you use it, the more it produces, the more you talk of it, the less you understand. So I don't know, I found that very intriguing, but puzzling at the same time. I'd be curious to hear others' interpretations of that one kind of has a inverse relationship, or maybe one of them is like, to use the Nassim Taleb terms, one seems to be fragile, the other's kind of anti-fragile in the sense. So at least this one seems to be saying the use, the more you use it, the more it produces, the more you talk of it. So I don't know if,
Sure.
I'm curious
Yeah.
to hear others.
So anybody who wants to comment on it, go ahead and put a exclamation mark. I'm going to start with Franklin, followed by Jean. Franklin. Actually, Jean, I think Jean had put it twice, and she's probably wants to respond to Zach. So let me go ahead and go to Jean first, Franklin. Sorry about that. Jean, go ahead. At least this time you did not type 4 times. It's still, go ahead.
Yeah, just want to make sure it's I'm responding, not.
Yes.
Anyway, so I think it's mentioned about practicing instead of talking. I think it's similar, like they mentioned earlier. The sage is teaching by doing it. They don't teach by talking. I think it's emphasized a lot about learning through the behavior, the activity, instead of just through talk. I think it's along the same line. That's my understanding.
Wonderful. All right. Next up is going to be Franklin, followed by Kevin and Phil. Franklin.
Okay, I'm going to read these lines by request, and they are, let me come back to it here. The lines are: infinite wisdom and possibilities available to all of us. We know instinctively how to use it, as we were born with it. And this is an interpretation from the Mitchell lines. It is empty yet infinitely capable. The more you use it, the more it produces. The more you talk of it, the less you understand. And this was from Donna. She wanted me to read that because her speakers are making a lot of noise.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is Kevin, followed by Phil. Kevin.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to use a Western way. I try use Western way to answer that question. That are easy to see, but hard to do. As is doing and seeing is like yin and yang. Sometimes we need sometimes we better than talking, but hard, to implement. As you could be a good teacher for others, but for your own problem, it's hard to deal with. That's my experience. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Next up is Phil. Phil.
Yeah, I think this is a human problem, because we do have the problem of words, and yet we have to deal with reality as it is in a funny way. I don't think it's because we're trapped in using words. We do use words, but so it's not as if words themselves in a way get you lost. It's a matter of how, I guess, if you squeeze it too hard, you try to peel it, then what it does is begin to reflect the words themselves rather than the meaning behind it. I've always been kind of sad that our society has moved to a point where we no longer really appreciate poetry. Poetry speaks with words, but the speaking of the words themselves are so ambiguous and nebulous that it leaves the void open for interpretation. So in a sense, poetry is really like pointing to something rather than peeling the onion until there's no onion left. I mean, I think this is where the problem is. I think I'm not saying that we shouldn't be analytical. It's just that we should also respect the poetry that speaks, but is also silent at the same time. I mean, that's the trick that we have to equivocate between the wisdom of the universe and the trap that our mind is put into, the trap of words in that sense. So I kind of think, once again, in a funny way, poetry is almost like the middle ground, that you have to find some place where it responds to the human nature, but on the other hand, also doesn't go so deep into this particular segment of the human nature that no longer captures the infinite within words themselves.
Wonderful, folks. So we are about at the halfway point. So let's go to number 6. It's very short and it's very powerful. So who would like to read number 6? Claudio, do you want to read number 6?
Yes.
Go ahead.
The valley spirit never dies. It is called the mystic female. The door of the mystic female is the root of heaven and earth. Being interminable and seeming to endure, it can be used without toil. And yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Next up is going to be Joe, Judith, and Dave. Joe.
This is the 6th verse, also with the Wayne Dyer version. The spirit that never dies is called the mysterious feminine. Although she becomes the whole universe, her immaculate purity is never lost. Although she assumes countless forms, her true identity remains intact. The gateway to the mysterious female is called the root of creation. Listen to her voice, hear it echo through creation. Without fail, she reveals her presence. Without fail, she brings us to our own perfection. Although it is invisible, it endures. It will never end.
Was this Wayne Dyer?
Yeah, Wayne Dyer. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Judith, Dave, Maritza, Brian, and Kevin. Judith.
I like that one very much. So I'm reading Stephen Mitchell again, and he's got, again, just 5 lines here. I really actually like I like the ones I've just heard, but this is so different and I like it very, very much. So the Tao is called the Great Mother. Empty yet inexhaustible, it gives birth to infinite worlds. It is also present within you. You can use it any way you want.
Wow. Wow. Both those translations, the side by side, it's really amazing. Maybe we have at the end, maybe we'll just have those 2 translations and see what they sound like together. Thank you, Judith. Dave, Maritza, and Brian next. Dave.
The valley spirit never dies. We call it the mysterious female. The gates of the mysterious female, these we call the roots of heaven and earth. Subtle yet everlasting, it seems to exist. In being used, it is not exhausted.
Wow. Thank you. Next up is Maritza, followed by Brian. Maritza.
I just learned that the version I had was actually Stephen Mitchell's. I was looking for Evanique's version from the Divine Mother of last time, and I came across this random website called Tao-Mother, and it had this one. I had no idea it was Stephen Mitchell's. That's the one I would have read. If I may, and if you will all forgive me, I'm actually going to read one in Spanish.
Please.
It's my favorite translation. It's Antonio Rivas Gonsalves, and this one speaks of rivers and the heart, and it's just a slightly different version from all the others that I've read, and I really love it. Igual que el lecho en un río, el corazón nunca se llena. Es un indescriptible, cuya entrada es la fuente del mundo. Tao está siempre presentado en él, manteniendo sobre él, nunca fallará. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Maritza. Let's see. Next up is going to be Brian, followed by Kevin. Brian.
Okay, I continue for the time being with the Bart Marshall version. The urge of creation is ceaseless. It is called the Dark Mother. The womb of the Dark Mother is the ground of heaven and earth. Timeless, imperceptible, it continues ever present. Endless use does not touch it.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Kevin, could you read the Chinese version first before you read your version?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, chapter 6. 是古生不死，是谓学拼。学拼之门，是谓贴地根。绵绵若从，用之不勤。My translation here is what is complete? The valley spirit, undying, is called mystic female. The gate of mystic female is called the root of sky and soil. It flows continually, barely perceptible. Utilize it. It is never exhausted. And thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Next up is Evanik.
So this one is from God as Nature Sees God, a Christian reading. So the spirit of emptiness is eternal. It is called the mysterious woman. Her womb is called the source of heaven and earth, dimly seen, yet eternally present. It is always there for you to use. It's easy.
Wow, thank you. Thank you. These are amazing. Can we do a repeat of Joe reading from Wayne Dyer and then Judith reading from Stephen Mitchell? And then we will go into comments. Oh, wait a minute. Franklin had something. Franklin, go ahead. Franklin?
Again, I'd like to go to this Jim Clatfelter, which it feels like an outlier in certain respects. He says, complete and full awareness is like an open valley of endless generation that doesn't reach the end. It's a simple presence. It's a nothing you can see. You'll find it right at center, wherever you may be.
Wonderful, wonderful. There is a translation I want to read before we go to the two translations. This is a very unusual translation by a guy called Ron Hogan. He tries to put things in a fairly almost colloquial way. I don't always like it, but sometimes he does a fantastic job of kind of capturing the heart of things. It's very short, just 4 lines. Tao is an eternal mystery, and everything starts with the Tao. Everybody has Tao in them. They just have to use it. So Joe, can you go ahead and reread the Wayne Dyer translation?
Sure. The spirit that never dies is called the mysterious feminine. Although she becomes the whole universe, her immaculate purity is never lost. Although she assumes countless forms, her true identity remains intact. The gateway to the mysterious female is called the root of creation. Listen to her voice, hear it echo through creation. Without fail, she reveals her presence. Without fail, she brings us to our own purification, our own perfection, forgive me. Although it is invisible, it endures, it will never end.
Wonderful. Judith?
The Tao is called the Great Mother, empty yet inexhaustible. It gives birth to infinite worlds. It is always present within you. You can use it any way you want.
Wonderful. All right, folks. So we can now discuss this as an entire unit, so you can talk about it as a whole. So to comment, go ahead and type exclamation mark in chat. So it's going to be Madeline followed by Judith and then Phil. Madeline.
Yes, well, I was interested in what Franklin had said before, basically about the theory of forms in a sense, that the yin would be the equivalent of underlying mathematical patterns. But I am even more interested in, once again, the vivid use of imagery, but within the poem, like a resonant symbol but without narrative. So one scholar wrote that the valley spirit, a valley supports life, feeds the animals who live there, and provides fertile earth for agriculture. It can do this only because it is empty. It accepts the flow of the river because it is most low and most humble. It receives the warmth of the sun because it is wide and not filled with anything to block the light. It brings forth life because it supports all who come to it. And my translation says, her gateway is the root of heaven and earth. It is like a veil barely seen. And that, I guess for me, was the link between the underlying patterning that Franklin was talking about, or the spiral, which is that a veil is something woven. And so it's something woven that lies between us and the rest of the world that's barely seen. But at the same time, we're supposed to be using it, this gossamer thing that will never fail.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Marilyn. I know this is one of your favorite ones. I think you've brought it up once before. So next up is going to be Judith, Phil, Joe, and Claudio. Judith.
Well, this is my favorite one, at least today, this week, last couple of weeks, might be different next week, I don't know. But I like this one, at least Stephen Mitchell, because it makes me think of potentiality and with the infinite possibilities and the being and the non-being, like the moment before you create when the potential becomes something. And it makes me also think about the interconnectedness of everything, the Tao. Like we often think of our own actions, what can I do? But every single thing that we do is one way a consequence of everybody else's action and nature's and all the things that happen. So at the same time that you have this infinite potential for how does he say it? Like it's always present within you. You can use it any way you want. So you have free will, you have free choice. And yet your free will and your free choice is a consequence of your circumstances, your past choices, other people's choices. I mean, like I was thinking about I could decide to kill all the weeds in my lawn, right? But how good I am at that also is gonna depend on how tenacious they choose to be, or how tenacious my neighbor chooses to be, or I could choose not, I could choose either way. But either way, I'm going to have a result that's not going to be just my doing. And that's true, with the world, our earth. So it's our neighbors, it's ourselves, it's our neighbors, it's our communities. It's just everything. So it makes me think about all those things. And that is why I like it.
Thank you, Judith. Next up is going to be Phil, followed by Joe. Phil.
Yeah, going back to the Garden of Eden, the tree of wisdom, the tree of knowledge, rather, not wisdom, and the tree of life. Female, obviously, it is more connected to the tree of life, although they never ate it. They were thrown out before, after they ate the tree of knowledge. So in a sense, and as civilization went along, it seemed to be more and more focused on knowledge. At least at one time, the feminine voice or the female voice, although it was not the ruler, it was the queen who whispers to the king and therefore could influence the world of knowledge by this other thing that we did not pay attention to, tree of life. The one word that I object to is the gateway. I would like to substitute that word with that word entrance, because I've looked up the word entrance when I was writing an essay, And I found out entrance was spelled the same way as entrance. It's a different meaning and a different noun, but I just like that dual meaning. So when we enter into the tree of life, we are not only entering, we are entranced by the mystic powers of life itself. Entrancing. Maybe that's why women have been silenced, because we don't want to be entranced. We want to just know. And I think it's time we begin to have the voice come back. If not the king, at least the queen. So I think it's like, I think we have to at some point go to the tree of life and have an understanding of that tree.
Wonderful, beautifully put. Thank you, Phil. Next up is going to be Joe, Claudio, and Franklin. Joe.
Yeah, it's tough to follow Phil. I mean, it really is. That was really well put. The way I looked at this, I really like this poem as well. It's the yin is the foundation of all things, is the way I look at it. And what I really appreciated about my particular translation, although I'm reading the translations that you had sent out earlier, and it's amazing how different they are. But although she assumes countless forms, her true identity remains intact. And there's a certain fluidity that exists, and adaptability that exists in that statement, but also its resilience speaks to me as well, that, you know, the true identity remains intact. And listen to her voice. Without fail, she brings us to our own perfection. Although it is invisible, it endures, it will never end. That gives you a certain amount of confidence that you wouldn't otherwise have had. I think that, and that's listening to yourself as opposed to listening to external voices. And that's the way I see this, as really listening, is getting in touch with your yin that exists in all of us, and the strength that exists within that. And within that, if we have creativity and flexibility and purity and things, yeah, and that's my initial takeaway. Anyway, I'll leave it there.
Wonderful. I mean, I really like the you know, bringing it to yin, of actually kind of being in touch with the flow of life in you, rather than being distracted by the words that you're currently using. So it's kind of, you know, coming back to the center. Also, this is talking about the fecundity of life. You know, it's like reminding that there is this tremendous fecundity that nature has, and you have that within you. So amazing. Claudio, followed by Franklin. Claudio.
Yes, it's interesting that this particular chapter uses a female or a feminine to describe the valley spirit, which one of the speakers said is at the center of the valley, in the middle, and the mystic female. Phil mentioned that connotated with the queen, you know, according to Chinese tradition and history. But another reason why female could have been used instead of male, or something neutral, is perhaps the qualities of female, how they differ with the male, because traditionally in the Chinese culture, the female was seen as passive, taking less action than the male, less active, less confrontational, less adversarial, right? Which is conducive to spirituality and mysticism, right? So in order to get in touch, like through the door that leads to ultimate reality, so you got to go through, you got to have these particular qualities. So that's my take on it, because the valley does seem to suggest the valley spirit, like the center, the middle, means neutral, impartiality. So that it's in line with the female quality, I guess. Yeah, very difficult chapter to understand, but thank you.
Sorry, thank you, Claudio. Next up is Franklin, followed by Maritza. Franklin.
Okay, thank you. I love this chapter, this poem. It speaks of the valley, and the valley is very dear to me. I spent countless hours when I was young wandering through Zor Valley, and it was my sacred center of my universe. And at one point, I became undifferentiated from the valley. I became one. It became a living metaphor of my own soul, the way I understood myself as a reflection of the universe. And so I have a translation here. And you might wonder, is this really a translation? But I think it'll work. I spent hours hiking in the old growth forest at Zor Valley. Ancient trees of many species stand 120 feet tall if they're a foot, and bearing the marks, the scars, and deformities of surviving the centuries through their astonishing performances of stoic temperance and titanic might. Their fluttering leaves whispering to reveal the invisible breath of the winds, scintillating the canopy of myriad greens and marblesque patterns, ebbing like the sea. Now and again, some living sentry of the haunting paradise gives voice in weird strains or a momentary percussive rattle in utterance of its incomprehensible effort to stand tall, hold fast the earth and stones, and stretch its limbs to capture the blazing sun, like a whale opening its maw to feed on krill. Winding passages all up and down the miles of trails, wild old tenements of lichen, and fresh colonies of mushrooms that greet the senses with unbridled curiosity, naked as jaybirds, bashful as children, living proof that the dead rise with fresh eyes and gaze upon a world strangely familiar and completely new.
Wow, Franklin, that was beautiful. I want to point out one thing. You know, this is southern China that he's writing in. I grew up in India, which is tropics, and the lushness, the fecundity of a valley in tropics, which is teeming with life. Okay, that is something else. I want to point out that, you know, when Darwin got down in South America, he was, you know, he used to collect beetles back in UK, and he gets down from his ship and he looks down, just looks down, and there are like 12 different species of beetles he has not seen before. So for somebody to actually encounter life, there is that grandeur of saying, wow, look at this, and there is that sense of awe that comes with it. So I think because we are operating in the temperate world, we don't realize the full impact of the valley, which is actually carried in the original version of people, you know, when somebody from there is reading this. Thank you, Franklin. Really appreciate that. Maritza, can I get you to read your translation of the Spanish poem before anything else? Thank you.
Okay. Just as the bed of a river, the heart is never filled. It is that thing beyond description, whose entrance is the fountain of the world. Tao is always present within it. When walking with him, it shall never fail you.
Wonderful. Go ahead.
So this one speaks to me. So across all the countless of versions that I have read, this one speaks to me because I can picture the imagery of, the water flowing in a riverbed, and when it's like a really, really clear river and it's not shallow, but you can see all the way to the bottom and you see that sediment there.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're just standing there and the sun is shining and you just feel at peace, that's what I'm thinking of when I'm reading this, because I can just feel that that's what he's saying, is that it's just like that, this calm state, which encompasses a heart, which is kind of the opposite of a calm state, but it doesn't have to be, because your heart can also be a calm state, because it reminds you that since the Tao is all things, the Tao also encompasses this crazy thing that we call heart. And that's kind of the way I'm hearing this one. And I like the idea of when you walk with him, it's never going to fail. Like it's a different way of saying, it's never going to be empty. It's never going to fill up, that we were hearing in the poem number 5, because it's another way of saying to you that, that which flows all around us, within us, and without us, it's all one and the same. Like, I'm going to bring up Sullivan for 2 seconds, because he tells us, nature is us and we are nature. And this one here, this poem speaks to that imagery for me.
Wonderful. It's a very interesting twist that Tao is masculine in this. And this
it's funny, yes. So technically it's not masculine. So that's the slight hard. It was a little bit, make me nervous to translate it, because I was like, how do I change that? Because it's not literally that Tao is masculine. It's that Tao is gender masculine.
Mm-hmm.
But so it's not masculinity. It's more like the concept of the yang,
mm-hmm.
like where it's more the obvious, the explicit, as opposed to the implicit, is what I'm
mm-hmm.
sensing here,
mm-hmm.
especially for this translator.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Phil, followed by Kevin. Phil.
I'll just make a brief comment on what just said, and then also about what you
mm-hmm.
said about Darwin. We have to understand that all human beings are a mixture of the masculine and feminine. I think that's one of the problems we have. Then back to your comment about Darwin. Obviously, Darwin was not a proper Victorian gentleman, because if he had, he would quickly ignore all the diversity of the beetles and start converting nature into a Victorian reproduction of Victorian England as best as he could, like Robinson Crusoe, who really is a true hero of Victorian England. So that just made me laugh, that in order to get into the Tao, in a sense, you have to transcend the limits of your own environment to be able to see beyond that, because obviously Robinson Crusoe was not able to transcend that, and he had to recreate the world that he lived in rather than observe another world that was right in front of him. So that was interesting that you made that comment, because I just sort of laughed, like, what an improper English gentleman he was.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the thing is that the proper English gentleman is focused on implementing the words
That's right.
and the current social systems that they are operating in.
Implementing the empire.
Yes.
Because they want to be the viceroy of India.
Yes. But more than that, I mean, they're trying to do that within their entire life.
That's right.
And the quote unquote properness comes from that. It's kind of culture over nature.
Yeah.
Current culture. Whereas Darwin is actually seeing and actually responding to the Tao. He's responding to life. He's saying, what is it? What is it? And he's letting that flow in him and not hurrying up to actually name things. It took him a long time to name things. So he let waves and waves of experience wash over him. And slowly things kind of names coagulated. So wonderful. Next up is Kevin. Kevin.
Okay, thank you. I going to bring my notes. I would expand the valley concept to the sea, ocean. We also consider sea or ocean as a mother of nature, right? And I would also consider ancestors are our gateway for our life, our future. And because we are inherited from ancestors, so this is from time is, span. So it's going to help us not just consider future by ourselves, keep explore, look back, cause could be one source we can reach our life. Also, other nature from the mountain to valley, also sea and ocean. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. I mean, water is there everywhere. I mean, another way of looking at it is just the water and what its power is and what it does. All right, wonderful. So I think these meetups are going so well. I mean, this is way beyond what I had even hoped for. I mean, I'm just so grateful to all of you because I've been wanting to study Dao De Jing, and this is like studying it in stereo sound or like multiple speakers here. And I think it's much better to see it in kind of audio analogy, because each person kind of captures some aspect and all of them kind of dance together. So it's like there is the Tao. Then on the top of that, Lao Tzu, I mean, he's brought it us to, I mean, that's fantastic. I mean, I just love that. And I respect, Lao Tzu for that he's actually in this amazingly poetic way. And it's poetic. So it's, as Phil was saying, poetry has a power because it not only denotes, but it also connotes. It suggests a whole bunch and pulls in a large part of the world into your brain to consider relationships. That's what it is doing. And then all these translators or interpreters who are pulling in, bringing their own understanding to actually interpret, because a great translator kind of has to rise up to a significant extent to the original creation in order to make it sing. And many of these translators have done that to some extent. And when you hear the chorus of all of them, and then hear the chorus of people actually reading it, people actually commenting on it, and discussing it in this way, I think this is very special. And the level of what I'm getting from it, thanks to all of you, is just so much higher than what I could possibly do on my own. So thank you very much, folks. Next up is Franklin. If you have, guys, at this point, if you have any questions, any comments about the format, how it is working for you, how this experience is working for you, just go ahead and type exclamation mark. Franklin.
Shrikant, since this chapter is on the valley, and since you said something so sweet about poetry, I wonder if it would be appropriate to introduce Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Kubla Khan, which is considered by many the greatest poem in the English language.
Go
And
for it.
I think it could really be, the case could be made that it really is about the Tao, and when something is working against the Tao, what nature does to put things back in order, and all kinds of references to everything we've been talking about. So he says, in Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree, where Elf the sacred river ran, through caverns measureless to man, down to a sunless sea. So twice 5 miles of fertile ground with walls and towers were girdled round. And here were gardens bright with sinuous rills, where blossomed many an incense-bearing tree. And here were forests ancient as the hills, enfolding sunny spots of greenery. But oh, that deep romantic chasm, which slanted down a green hill athwart a cedarn cover, a savage place, as holy and enchanted as ere beneath a waning moon was haunted by woman wailing for her demon lover. And from this chasm, with ceaseless turmoil seething, as if this earth in fast, thick pants for breathing, a mighty fountain momently was forced, amid whose swift, half-intermitted burst, huge fragments vaulted like rebounding hail, or chafy grain beneath a thresher's flail. At once and ever it flung up momently the sacred river, 5 miles meandering in a mazy motion, through wood and dale the sacred river ran, then reached the caverns measureless to man, and sank in tumult to a lifeless ocean. And mid this tumult, Kubla heard from far ancestral voices prophesying war. The shadow of the dome of pleasure floated midway on the waves, where was heard the mingled measure from the fountain and the caves. It was a miracle of rare device, a sunny pleasure dome with caves of ice. A damsel with a dulcimer in a vision once I saw. It was an Abyssinian maid, and on her dulcimer she played, singing of Mount Abura. Could I revive within me her symphony and song, to such deep delight would win me, that with music loud and long, I would build that dome in air, that sunny dome, those caves of ice. And all who saw should see them there, and all would cry, beware, beware, his flashing eyes, his floating hair. Weave a circle round him thrice, and close your eyes in holy dread, for he on honeydew hath fed, and drunk the milk of paradise.
Wow. Wow. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Franklin. Thank
My
you.
pleasure. Yeah.
Joe. Joe, you have to follow this again.
Yeah, I mean, I mean
You can be speechless. You can simply say, "I'm speechless," and
okay, that's good. I'm going to say I'm speechless.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, I really, it is hard. That was amazing. That was really, truly amazing, Franklin. No, I mean, I was just going to comment on the format. It's really, really, I feel the same way. I'm getting more out of it than I could ever imagine, because hearing all the different translations, and a perfect example is it's kind of even, sometimes it's helping me clarify my own thoughts. So the use of the one that Maritza had transferred translated with the use of him, we were talking about how the yin is in all of us, and how most of these translations had female, listen to her voice at the end of it. But it was, the way I interpreted it is that we, as Phil had mentioned, the female voice is in all of us, and that's something that is like kind of like how we are interpreting it. But hearing different translations and putting these things together make it much more clear to me, and it's kind of confirmation, or sometimes it may invalidate something that I was thinking as well, like the last week. So I'm finding this format to be really, really, really make it a much more rich experience. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Phil.
I just want to ask a question about Kolowitz's poem, because to my understanding, he didn't complete it because he was writing almost in a kind of stream of consciousness, and he was disturbed. And if that's true, I wonder if the poem would have been better if he actually finished it, because he was very disappointed that he tried to remember, he couldn't. Because if he finished it, it would have reached the end of destiny. But the fact that he didn't finish it, in a sense, it was left to a certain degree dangling. And I wonder whether that was more in the spirit of the Tao than actually if he actually finished it. So it's just a curious question about, you could look at that as being very lucky that he was interrupted, or just very disappointed that we never actually got to hear what he had to say. So that's kind of interesting. I mean, that's a puzzle that always puzzled me, because it is a great poem as far as it went. But I wonder how it ended, how it might have ended, and whether that was better for it or actually not so good after all.
Franklin, go ahead.
He wrote that not less than 5,000 lines flowed over him in a vision accompanied by music. And he was writing it when his doctor returned to find out how he was doing with the laudanum, kept him for 45 minutes. And when he comes back, he picks it up with a damsel with a dulcimer and a vision once I saw. It was an Abyssinian maid, and on her dulcimer she played. Could I revive within me her symphony of song, to such deep delight would win me, that with music loud and long, I would build that dominator. So he's kind of saying, like the vision, I've lost all the lines, but if I could recall it, it would just be the greatest thing. It would please me. And he became addicted and kept going back, trying to get back there. And he really became a wreck. But ultimately, he recovered, and he became, one of probably the greatest Oxfordian teacher of all time, the greatest Shakespearean critic of all time.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is Madeline. Madeline, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to comment on what Phil brought up and Franklin elaborated upon, because I too was thinking of the famous interruption to Coleridge when he was writing. I believe that his note on it, his sole surviving notes on it, say that it was a person from Porlock, which was some nearby town.
It was the doctor who prescribed the laudanum. It was the first time that he took an opium derivative, and he had this otherworldly experience that rose up as a vision with music and visions that flowed over him like a river, with not less than 5,000 lines, which he was in the process of writing when the doctor came to check in on him. It kept him for 45 minutes.
I had read something differently about the history of the interruption. I just wanted to go back and comment about the format of how well this meeting works. I think that especially for this particular text, it's the ideal form, because the chapters are short and it's not a narrative. And while it has some resonant symbols, it's not telling a story. And since it is about the 10,000 things, we have, not quite 10,000 people on here with different translations, but in a way, it's about a world of many centers with different interpretations. And so the format is echoing that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Madeline. Appreciate that. And I think, yeah, it's just amazing. Phil, about the format.
Yeah, could I comment on what Madeline just said?
Sure.
There was a time that I was just fascinated by fragments of things discovered from the past, because in the fragments, it left plenty of space for me to interpret imagine, quote, the wrong narrative to the completion of the thing. And to me, that incompleteness actually opened a lot more room for me to be into it, rather than if it's complete, then it's kind of like, well, I guess there's still room for interpretation, but the hallway that led to those interpretations is narrower. So in a funny way, I think always when we look at fragments of anthropology, historical anthropology, I think we're discovering, we're uncovering, but on the other hand, we're also projecting into that interpretation. And so it's very curious that the pre-Socratics also, many of them left fragments, such as Heraclitus. And that's, in some ways, it's frustrating because, like, what the hell did he mean? But on the other hand, it's also more interesting because it actually left more room for you to into the text. So that's kind of interesting. So I like that idea of incompleteness.
The point here is actually very, very large, of this idea of doing this dance between explicitness and bringing in all the tacit implicitness that surrounds it, never losing track of the ground because you have identified the figure, and being able doing things in a way, I mean, poetry is designed for that. Like we are looking at the work of Walter Ong. He talks about the power of aphorisms. Aphorism does exactly that. For example, one of his famous aphorism is all text is pretext. Okay, so what he means is that little sentence, it kind of goes and explodes in your head, because you say, what do you mean pretext? Oh, then you realize that it pretends to actually name nature. So it is a way of trying to pretend to replace real things with ideas, with words. And but the words don't, they don't capture the entire context. So the interesting thing is that Walter Ong thinks that this is actually one of the critical parts of language. That what we are doing right now, and I agree with him, that what we are doing right now is actually not optional. That if you really want to understand something, you have to do this. You have to read, and then you have to write, and then you have to speak. You have to speak to other people, and you have to listen. And it's in that process of working over the material many, 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 many times with these rich feedback loops. It's that process of actually engaging nature, using words as just tools, straw dogs, if you will, in the process. You have to regard your words, your own words, as straw dogs. That's what language is. He calls it language as interpretation. So this is a very large series that we are on with that. We've had 2 lectures on it, which are I'm about to put the second one on the internet, on YouTube. But probably what promises to be the best one in this series is coming up this Saturday at 5 p.m. Eastern time. One of his close associates of many, many decades, with whom he had a very rich correspondence, Randy Lump, is going to be here, and he's going to be talking about English, because all his students said that the way in which you are using language is different. And he's just, they just called it English. He does English, and it's a way of using language. And it is actually consonant. It's very similar to what we are doing here. So if you're interested, please join. Yes, Phil.
Yeah, that's sort of what I was saying about, I used the metaphor of the onion.
Mhm.
As you peel the onion, one way you can look at it is you think that if you peel enough off, you'll get to the essence of the onion. But in fact, when you get to it, it's all gone. I mean, in some sense, like peeling deeper and deeper does give you a feeling maybe you'll get to the essence. And that, in fact, the essence is only there when, how should I say, the otherness also is present in the essence. And so that's the whole problem of like Western thinking, is that we're a little too concerned with identities, because we think, oh, this really is irrelevant stuff. Just peel that off. We'll eventually find out what the real onion is, and then it turns out it disappears.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was a very Joe, I have not announced it yet. I'm waiting for details of the meetup from Randy, and I should be announcing it in a day or two. One of the interesting comments that is there that Bill Rowe, who is an expert on Janes, made was that, he was working on a science project with all the scientists, and he said, I have never been as social talking to people as I was in that science laboratory. Because normally people think of scientists as being these individual people, you work everything out. He says, no. There was this enormous amount of conversation that was going on. Considering all the ideas, all the consequences, all of that is being shaped in conversation. So conversation is not something like nice to have afterwards, but it's the core process of dealing with reality. So friends, thank you so much for being a part of this, and we'll see you next time. Bye. See you.
Thank you.